So good evening to one and all, and welcome to the
Yeah,
15th
Shalom.
episode of the PGC Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Saurabh Kaura, and I'm a coursework officer on the UNSW Sydney Postgraduate Council. The Postgraduate Council at UNSW Sydney is a student body that represents, supports, and advocates for all the postgraduate students. So if you have got any questions or concerns, please do reach out to us. I would like to start the podcast series by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Bidjigal and Gadigal peoples, the traditional custodians of the lands from where each of our UNSW campuses are located, and all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders past, present, and emerging, and their communities who have shared and practiced their teachings over thousands of years. We recognize the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's ongoing leadership and contributions, including to business, education, and industry. So today we have got two eminent guests amidst us today. Firstly, we have His Excellency Mohammad Ashraf Haidari, who is joining us from Colombo. He's currently the ambassador of Afghanistan to Sri Lanka and concurrently serves as the Director General of the South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, which Afghanistan is a member state of. Mr. Haidari was the Director General of Policy and Strategy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan from 2015 to 2018. Prior to this, he also served as Afghanistan's Deputy Chief of Mission to India for 3 years, before which he was Afghanistan's Deputy Assistant National Security Advisor for Policy and Oversight. Thank you so much, His Excellency, for joining us today.
Thank you.
We also have Maryam Popal Zahid, who is the founder and director of Afghan Women on the Move. Afghan Women on the Move creates a safe platform for women as survivors of war and trauma to gather and participate in arts and cultural programs outside of religious and political influences. With 18 years of experience working now in the community sector, Maryam's work focuses on gender equality, women's rights, and the displacement of Afghan diaspora around the world with a focus on those from minority backgrounds. Thank you so much, Maryam, today for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Sure. Now, the topic of discussion for today is definitely the topic on tackling the traumas faced by the women of Afghanistan and what has happened with the withdrawal of the US forces, which we have all witnessed in the last 1 week after the Taliban has captured. There are several questions being asked on what the future of women will look like, and also a general situation on how the things will move forward in Afghanistan. So probably I can start the discussion with His Excellency, who may give us a brief overview of what the current situation in Afghanistan is currently, and how does he think the future is looking like for Afghanistan for all those who have joined us from across Australia and Afghanistan today.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for hosting this very timely discussion to provide information on what has been developing in Afghanistan and how the situation in Afghanistan on the short and long term impact our immediate neighborhood, but also the rest of the world. And of course, the role of women seminal and everything that we have achieved so far, and what implications now as a result of these recent developments would have for Afghanistan itself, for the neighborhood, and for the rest of the region. Right now, as we speak, there's a lot of uncertainty as far as what's happening, especially to the women of Afghanistan and the critical achievements that they have had over the past 20 years. Remember that under the Taliban back in early 2000s and the 1990s, there were very few Afghan girls who were going to the schools without any teachers, any equipment, forget about laboratories and modern education and modern curriculum, to where we are. Over 20 million Afghans are going to school. About 40% of those are girls and women across the Afghan government, beginning from the Afghan parliament, which consists of 20 7%. Now, unfortunately, that's gone, and that 27% is more, women in our parliament over the past 20 years than the number of women in the U.S. Congress or the British Parliament, and perhaps also in the Australian Parliament. That we have more women 20 years on since the fall of the Taliban in 2001 than some of the most established democracies, which have been helping and partnering with us to get where we were just before August 15th. So unfortunately, everything now remains unbalanced, to be seen, as much as the Taliban have been assuring the women of Afghanistan, everyone in Afghanistan, that they would, continue self 20 years, and allowing women to continue getting education and to continue working, etc. But within the limits of a kind of Sharia or a version of Sharia that perhaps Afghans are not used to, and that not been used to even the first time around when they were ruling Afghanistan. So imagine that if women were just allowed to get education up to grade 12, then I think that's fine as far as gaining some literacy. But as far as enabling them to stand on their own independently, financially, and to make a sustainable contribution to Afghanistan's long-term sustainable development. Remember, the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course all countries, including Afghanistan, have adopted, and which we must, implement, and that cannot be possible without, half of Afghanistan's education, population, meaning women, to receive tertiary education, that's higher education, in all fields from humanities, social sciences to hard sciences, meaning that without the participation of women through higher education, it's really hard to imagine how we could achieve those sustainable goals, how we could achieve the sustainable security and development of Afghanistan. Here, we shouldn't forget that in contexts like Afghanistan, human security and protective security are intertwined. And so without women, we cannot achieve that. So that's why, as the G7 summit is meeting today, I think this is the right platform, because there's so many, young voices and young leaders that are watching this or participating, to call on the G7 leadership to watch and every word that the Taliban leadership has been saying, and also to analyze and to also predict. It's very easy to predict whether those words actually would materialize when it comes to sustainable peace and security and development. As a result, then they should condition their support accordingly when it comes to direct aid to the Taliban government. Then, as an example, versus providing direct support to the people of Afghanistan in ways that those aid programs actually make the impact, assess those in critical need, especially women, to help them carry on at least their routine, but as well as also build on the achievements of the past 20 years.
Thank you so much, His Excellency, for that wonderful answer. I was also looking at this important question that you touched base upon, that how reliable is the Taliban at this moment? Can they be relied at this point of time? Because a lot of things have changed from last time. If we see that now they are coming out with their mobile phones and broadcasting it to the entire world. They are also talking about the fact that we will focus on gender equality. They are doing that in open, probably to change the perspective of looking at them, or probably they really want to make some change in the way the world looks at them. So what do you have to say? Is the Taliban really a new Taliban that we are witnessing now, or is it the same one with a different face in front of the media?
Exactly, your later words that they just showed to have changed, but unfortunately they've changed for the worse, to the extent that we have observed over the past 3 months in the battlefields in areas where they've captured. Remember, the many districts, the villages, the provincial centers that they ran over, and the ways in which they destroyed critical service delivery infrastructure, critical service delivery state institutions, including clinics and hospitals and even schools and universities, and as well as cultural sites. So those are all indications to what's going to actually happen once this, tragic period is, gone, and once the international community has completely withdrawn their military presence from Afghanistan. So those weeks and months should come. They're on the horizon. So that's why we should be watching every word very carefully, and as well as every action that they take to, demonstrate whether they actually walk the talk. And when it comes to the rights of women, they're very clear. They say, yes, we provide them with the rights within the, framework of Sharia. And from our experience in the past and experience of Afghan women, we know what that means. That means limited, education. It's just at the level of literacy, and then staying home and not venturing out beyond, what they want women to do, not what women and their families aspire to do and for them to achieve in life. So this is the better half of our population, over 50%. Now we cannot imagine that Afghanistan, like I said a while ago, could stand on our own and be a contributing member of the international community with over half of our population just, limited to definitions justified under a Sharia that by no means represent true Islam. Remember that the wife of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Khadija, was the equivalent of today's female CEO, that the Prophet Muhammad actually worked for his wife, who was older than the Prophet himself, something that you see in the 21st century, and that was 7th century. So I don't think if the Taliban are even taking Afghanistan back to the 7th century, the true version of Islam that represents the vast, Muslim world, stretching, from all the way far east to North America, and one of the fastest growing religions. So this minority of extremists and terrorists that you see by no means represent Islam, by no means represent the, Islam's stance on the rights of women. Because remember, one of the very key reasons why Islam came into existence was that in the old Arabia, they used to bury the baby girls alive, and something that Islam addressed. Unfortunately, that's practiced in different ways, especially, infanticide, and especially in South Asia where I am and other parts of the world. But actually, Islam came to do away with that. And of course, we also know that a lot of women, even in the developed world, even in Switzerland, didn't get the right to inherit property from their, families. But in Islam, that was, not an issue and was resolved way in the beginning. So coming to the 21st century, building on what Islam introduced when it came into being in the 7th century, and thinking progressively, the kind of Islam that actually the Holy Quran preaches, which preaches, go and explore the universe. The Quran is very scientific when you look at it and compare it, to the other salvation religions and the books that came before Islam, through many different prophethoods in which we believe the very book of Islam, the Quran, is based on the books and the prophets that came before from the Abrahamic tradition. As a result, the Taliban and the like in the world do not represent Islam. Islam is tolerant. It is all about coexistence, peaceful coexistence, and progress, and as well as scientific progress. But let's see. Thanks.
Sure. Before I move to Maryam on a specific question related to women, there is another question to you, His Excellency, which is related to the fact that a lot of people have also asked, what were the alternative options in front of the Afghan president who ran away on that evening or some of them might say that he just ran away to for his people's safety, as he's portraying. So what is the reality and what really happened on that particular evening? Would you like to describe in your words, as you saw from your eyes, what happened all of a sudden when we saw that the Taliban captured the entire Kabul?
Well, my generation, we've been through, decades, the 4 decades, the Soviet invasion and occupation, and the Mujahideen took over, and then their fall in the Taliban, and then Americans on 9/11, and up to now. So we've watched all the movies. The movie really started back in 2003 when President Bush actually shortchanged Afghanistan for Iraq. So that's when actually Americans left, and that's when Afghans began, becoming demoralized. Until 2009, and there was a surge temporarily by President Obama, and then withdrawal of most of NATO forces at the end of 2014. And then Trump comes, he starts this what I call withdrawal agreement, not a peace agreement, because peace agreement has so many conditions and so many concessions to be made by both sides in order to reach a settlement, which didn't happen. So President Trump was completely intent for domestic political reasons to withdraw U.S. forces. So could he speak about it as one of his, key foreign policy success? And then, of course, he didn't win. President Biden did, and then unfortunately, and instead of actually reviewing and listening to his advisors to ensure that the situation we are experiencing today would not happen, he went ahead and implemented the fiasco by announcing 3 months ago or so that the U.S. forces would withdraw with all the enablers on which we had been, reliant and had grown reliant. As a result, unfortunately, our forces were abandoned blindfolded on the battlefield once those enablers were removed. And then, of course, there were a lot of political deals that happened in the background, as much as, of course, the propaganda machine of the Taliban, very much fueled by social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and hundreds of thousands of recruits from intelligence agencies of the state sponsor of the Taliban that were, feeding the global and regional and Afghans misinformation and disinformation that completely demoralized our forces. They fought really hard. We, lost over 70,000 forces, and as well as hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. And the, UNAMA reports are online, and anyone in your audience can go and look at, thousands of Afghans lost per year for believing in the achievements of democracy and human rights and women's rights, civil rights, and everything that I used to call a work in progress, that you cannot, get a state going, especially democratically, in 20 years. Remember that it took Australia centuries to be where it is. It took America, centuries to be where it is. It took Europe centuries to get where it is. So the Americans and the rest of our allies and NATO knew that the Afghan people and the Afghan state, despite, yes, corrupt practices and, here and there weak leadership, that is something that every nation suffers from. You can look at the Obama administration, and especially during his last days in office, and what happened to the U.S. Congress. How all these thugs basically forcing themselves and destroying things, and just an attack, an invasion. So if something like that happens in a country like U.S., then you could also expect things in Afghanistan. And also remember that at the very height of NATO's presence in Afghanistan, there were 150 plus thousand forces with some of the most advanced military equipment and intelligence and enablers. They could not, unfortunately, resist what is, unfortunately, a running stream and river of recruits coming from across the Doran line, where they're still sheltered, maintained, directed, and so forth. So when this campaign started, soon following the withdrawal of the announcement of the withdrawal of U.S. forces, thousands and thousands of madrasas were put on a break by the government of the state sponsor of the Taliban. And most of those madrasas are tied to the Islamist and extremist terrorist networks, which then, of course, Adnan supported the Taliban, but then they send all their, students inside, brainwashed, of course, armed and trained to support the Taliban to implement this creeping invasion and occupation of Afghanistan.
Sure. I think a lot of key insights coming from your answer there, His Excellency. I'll probably now move on to Maryam to talk about what Afghan Women on the Move has been doing in the last 20 years and how she sees the future of women now after the Taliban has captured Afghanistan, and how can the women come out of these circumstances.
Thank you, Saurabh, for inviting. Hello to His Excellency. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting you guys today. I am meeting from the direct land, and I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. For me, I from a place of trauma. I have escaped Taliban time. So I came 20 years ago to Australia. For me to look at what's going to happen while now the Taliban is back, which is quite shocking. I never imagined that Taliban will be back with the ideology that they carried in 21st century to begin with, but also for me as a woman as a survivor of war and now working in the past 20 years, was thinking that I'm healing, and I was hoping that things are changing for the better. We have connected back with Afghan women in Afghanistan. Afghan Women on the Move was not functioning or was not there 20 years ago. So the Afghan Women on the Move is a pretty new, in a sense, new organization. It's just functioning for the past 3 or 4 years. But I myself, I have been in contact with a lot of Afghan women back in Afghanistan because I know what it's like to be at that place. And Afghanistan has been a challenging place for Afghan women always. So for me to begin to think about what's going to happen now, Taliban, since they are just came and took us by surprise, what I probably would suggest or would hope that now that they are there in Afghanistan, we now have to be very vocal. We have to have our force, our voice, and our influence to be able to show the world, show in Afghanistan, work with Afghan women, work with Afghan young boys and girls, to not to leave them alone at this critical time. And we must be part of the discussion that government forming that they are working on, not to take the tools and ideologies that they've been working and implementing, how Afghan women should look like, what should they do, what can they do, what they should be doing. All of them has to come the way we have been achieving. There was so much in the past 20 years. In the past 20 years, Afghan women and Afghans in Afghanistan has shown to the world that they have so much potential when they given an opportunity. For example, Afghan women has shown to the world that they have potential of being entrepreneurs, small businesses. There were 880 small businesses, which given 7,700 individuals to run their small businesses and hire other women for them to work. So that's a huge achievement from one aspect. And then we have come with the artists. We have come with women that were in media. We have now judges. We have women that were traveling. We had women that were in our working as our politicians, representatives. So if Taliban now are saying that we will be giving Afghan women their rights according to their interpretation of Sharia law and Islam, and to what, if we compare them to what they were been doing 21 years years ago, it's not acceptable. We will not going back to the 20 years of Afghan Taliban way. And we will not accept that just the primary schools for Afghan women to get that education, if that is one of their conditions. Or now to, there are a few other angles that I'm not going to kind of assume or say it now, but because they have said we are working, they will do their, they will be soon come with their government announcements to what they have for Afghan women and communities and for particular platforms that we've been working outside of that traditional values that Afghan men were thinking that Afghan women, can function with these type of rules and structures. So it's too early for me to just say what is there for us. But I hope that they are not taking away the 20 years of achievement. We are hoping that we can build on it, and we can do much more than what was happening in the past 20 years. So and somebody who's from a war-torn country, I have been and I am experience a post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's something that women from a war-torn country, from Afghanistan, 90% of Afghan women has been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder that can lead to severe and chronic diseases as well. So when the women comes and countries that are in, like in Australia, there will be a lot of there should be a lot of help and services should be available, especially now that we will be receiving a quite number of Afghans that will be coming to Australia. So I will be also looking into how we can accommodate those people and how can we help to make sure that they are welcome and feel comfortable here.
Absolutely, Maryam. That's true. Meanwhile, I would like everyone to put their questions in the chat or raise their hands one by one if they have got any questions, the people who are present on the Zoom. Till that time, I'll ask one more question to Maryam, which is quite similar to what I asked to the Excellencies. How reliable are the Taliban at the moment? Because they seem to have a different phrase in front of the media as compared to what they were in 1996, as you just raised, that they have changed the way they work. They have changed the way they are publicizing themselves. So it seems to be a unique sort of organization now, which is trying to portray itself as if it is the right future for Afghanistan. How do you think about that?
With the Taliban, what they say on social media, and there are a few diplomatic figures that they have on the camera, but I believe that there are Talibans on the streets that we must see if they're going to put what their leaders or people that are on camera talking and practice. So until we don't see what is really they can do or how they're going to treat the civilians, the women behind the scene, when the camera is not there, when the media is not there, that is when we're going to judge them. At the moment, what the Taliban is saying on the camera, I don't. I have no faith in those interviews until we don't see them in practice. From what I have experienced back home, and from what I know from Taliban, they had no mercy. So that's something that it's always going to stay with me, and it's going to take a long time for me to be convinced that Taliban is not the same Taliban from 21 years ago. And as I said, trauma can stay with you for forever. And if you are being traumatized by a government that they are quite cruel towards the civilians, for them to come back just because they have a camera, they have a mobile phone, and they just kind of smile at the camera and say that we welcome everybody, but still there is a structure, there is a way of us to tell you guys what to do. I'm sure they will be feeling or facing some challenging challenges, just not from Afghan communities or Afghan women in Afghanistan, but also from the international communities, including Afghan women that we are feeling much safer here outside of Afghanistan. We will put pressure, and we will not leave Afghan women to be isolated the way they were, or the way I was back home 21 years ago, when there was no social media, there was no connection. We couldn't speak to the outside world. So it's not going to be like that from the community, even from an international perspective.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Maryam, that it's very difficult for us to judge from outside as to what their real intentions might be. But moving on to His Excellency now, and asking this very important question as to how long do you think that a country who has or which has suffered for so many years now can give many more years of torture in the name of another few years for the Taliban governance? Do you think that the future looks prominent under the Taliban rule, or do you think that we need to give them some time to judge what's happening there?
Unfortunately, judging from the past, that the future looks bleak, but we have to give them some time and see. But we also have to act. There are many ways that the international community act, many ways. And also there are many levers of influence that they could use to get the Taliban to move in the right direction. And that is basically just to consolidate the achievements of the past 20 years, including the empowerment of women. And so, like I said a while ago, we need to watch, we need to support where support is necessary, and that's to be tangible. It can be done cost effectively, not that most international presence has drawn down, and then the cost of helping address what is right now a very complex humanitarian crisis affecting women and children. The most is probably the spending of a month of international military in the past years. So it can also be done cost effectively. How we do that so that it can really reach the targeted beneficiaries, especially women and children, that is also doable simply because there is much experience and many lessons learned from Afghanistan itself and from the broader international experience and post-conflict situations. With our context being a bit different, but the international community, the aid agencies, and the governments through their aid programs can adjust quickly to first focus on the humanitarian crisis, not just the thousands of Afghans who've poured around the Kabul airport desperately trying to leave. And that's one. Of course, that needs to be addressed. That's the priority of the country, simply because they work with these people and they feel obligated to help save them. But then there's the added 35 million plus Afghan people, 50% or so women, and then even more, including children and youth. This is, even 70% desperate for assistance. Right now, there is no access to information because Afghanistan's freest press in the region is lost. There is no reporting on the ground in other, 30 plus Afghan provinces and districts, which the Taliban run over and destroyed much of, their infrastructure and the local institutions that used to provide services, even if minimal, and as well as international presence that used to be there providing aid, relief, recovery, especially to the victims of COVID-19 and the climate. Remember, in Afghanistan, it's not just the conflict that has been affecting Afghans, but also COVID-19. If you look at, there's no one masking in Afghanistan to protect themselves simply for lack of masks, simply for lack of oxygen in the clinics and hospitals. There are probably hundreds of Afghans dying as we speak, and it's not being addressed simply because everyone is concerned about their survival today and tomorrow, and not from a security perspective, but more from just feeding themselves to stay alive. And then climate change, like you pointed out, the outgoing Director General of South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, SACEP, an intergovernmental organization, working on climate change and environment across South Asia. Afghanistan is one of the member states. So within this region and globally speaking, South Asia is the most vulnerable region to climate change adverse effects. And within this vulnerable region, Afghanistan is the most vulnerable to climate change adverse effects. And so then over the past 3 months, if you see, Afghanistan has been hit by what is an expanding drought across many provinces, which has killed, livestock that people used to depend on, and as well as drawing water sources, especially clean water and the arable land that they used to cultivate, but that's no longer, done. And then also this climate-induced flash floods. Just 3 months ago, I visited Afghanistan, and 2 days after I arrived, 8 provinces were hit by these flash floods. We've seen, of course, in China, we've seen now in South Asia itself, and across Europe, we saw how many, homes and civilians were devastated and affected. But in case of Afghanistan, no preparedness by the NDMA, the National Disaster Management, to help those people. So thousands of people ended up losing their homes, arable land, livestock, and ending up becoming displaced again because they had already been displaced. So you see a displacement that has happened over and over again, either as a result of conflict, COVID-19, yes, in the mix, but climate and as well as poverty. So as a result, 300,000, I would say 500,000 displaced recently, 5 million Afghans protracted, including those hit in the early conflicts of the past 3-4 years, and then with 20 million suffering as a whole, where most of these 20 million live below the poverty line and have been affected by conflict, COVID, and climate. So that's the situation. And that's where the focus needs to be, not only on the airport tragedy that we are watching on global channels, but the rest 35 million people of Afghanistan. And this is exactly where the government of Australia can do a lot more, and as well as the G7, G20, United Nations itself has launched this appeal for 1.3 billion. I think that's not enough, despite the fact that it has only been met by about 30%, which is a shame given the this catastrophe and the scale of a human tragedy. So that initial appeal needs to be met, but also that appeal needs to be relaunched, asking for more life-saving assistance from the international community, which, like I said, is just a peanut compared to international military spending in Afghanistan. I can recall that the international community at one point had been spending over $100 billion a year in Afghanistan. When you hear about $2 trillion spent in Afghanistan, that $2 trillion were not actually given to the Afghan state, to the Afghan military, to the Afghan state institutions, but was mostly spent on the presence and operations of the international military, including that of Australia. So meaning spending on their own forces, then pocketing a lot in terms of contracting businesses that were maintaining those forces or maintaining ours, which also became part of the failure of or the collapse of the state in Afghanistan. So I'm happy really that you have hosted this, and I hope all the young professionals, all the young advocates and activists hear me, especially when it comes to advocating and lobbying for paying attention and increasing resources for addressing this humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan as we speak now.
Sure. Thank you so much, His Excellency. There are a few questions coming on the Zoom chat. One of them is, what can we as students or the public do at this moment to assist our fellow Afghan brothers and sisters here in Australia and also back in Afghanistan during these challenging times? Would you like to go with that, His Excellency?
Yes, like I said, I think raising awareness, keeping Afghanistan very much in the news, Now, we know that there is a deadline by which the international military presence should end, and the Taliban have already been warning that that shouldn't be extended. So the students should advocate for a continuation of that presence, so that all those people that need to be evacuated, they should be evacuated freely and safely. Second, humanitarian crisis that I just spoke about. I think they should, just go online and research on their own. There are many sources there, that they can look at, and then they can talk about it in the way that I talk, encouraging their own government, Australia, and the rest of the international community, the UN itself, the UN Security Council, of course, the P5, the G7, the G20, all these countries which have the resources, which have been in Afghanistan, as I pointed out, not to abandon Afghanistan, especially at this moment. They did betray Afghanistan, these students could say, because the cost of staying in Afghanistan was almost zero compared to, other missions where, say, for example, US has been right now engaged in, from Philippines to Colombia to, a very long-term presence in Germany, or very long-term presence in South Korea. And so they can also allude to that mission didn't cost much to begin with, and there was no cost to lives of Americans, because they were just in the bases and providing the enablers for the Afghan forces to do the fighting and dying for protecting and defending their freedoms. Unfortunately, they betrayed Afghans, and I can say that now they shouldn't abandon Afghanistan and abandon Afghans to deal with this human tragedy, that they should stay the course, that they should effectively condition incentives and disincentives to get put the Taliban and the state and sponsor of the Taliban to do the right thing. And that's to just address the immediate needs of the people, beginning from the IDPs, and then focus at the same time on ensuring the continuity, the continuation of what the Afghan people have achieved at so much blood and treasure over the past 20 years. And then personally, what they can do, well, if they can sponsor someone, if they can help someone evacuate, there are many Afghans desperate trying to find out how they can do this. Some do not have access to email. Others, they may have just a WhatsApp, or others may have just a telephone, directing, guiding, setting up websites which they can, use to pool information as far as which countries are helping evacuate people, and what forms that they need to be filled by those in need of evacuation, is streamlining those, simplifying those, and offering support and assistance, especially the Afghan diaspora community in Australia and in New Zealand. If they hear me, they should be actively first. Begin with your own family, then your close relatives, and then distant relatives, then any other Afghan, because getting one Afghan out and secure their future means, a secure future for Afghanistan, because Afghanistan would need the brain that we're losing today, but those brains could be saved and strengthened abroad and then return someday. Just we see Ms. Maryam Zahid as one of those people whom Afghanistan lost, but now you see she's such a great spokesperson on a global platform, raising awareness about Afghanistan. So in any way that they can support, and then also send small amounts of money. Probably $200 is not much for a family in Australia, but that $200 can get a family that has lost their jobs through. Imagine now thousands of Afghan employees from across the country have lost their jobs. They're displaced today, and they need that immediate cash in their hands to purchase the basics that they need to survive. They're on the streets of Kabul that you don't see, unfortunately, because all the journalists are at the airport, or in the parks, felt, or in the schools, completely forgotten. So raising awareness, supporting them in ways that we can, and beginning from our own families, and other students could even set up these GoFundMe accounts where they can then work with people like Maryam, and then connect with people on the ground to get those collected monies, donations to the right people in need.
Sure. Undoubtedly, His Excellency, that we all can say the kind of work Maryam has been doing in Australia through the different platforms has been inspirational for other women as well, as to how a woman from those circumstances can actually come out of that country and become an inspiration for other women. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted Maryam to be a part of this session, so that whosoever is looking at this session gets inspired by her story and probably can do something similar to what she has been doing. Also, another question on the Zoom chat, which I might direct towards Maryam, is how much realistic it would be to rescue the Afghanistan brothers and sisters out of the country? And what are the further details about empowering to be vocal about the rights of women in this scenario?
It's a good question. It's a difficult question as well. But what I would say that obviously in a realistic way, we won't be able to rescue all Afghans out of Afghanistan to begin with, no matter how many countries, how many sponsorship they will send. And there are 35 million people in Afghanistan. But what can we do, as His Excellency pointed out, that there are other helps that can be available, or we can streamline to work with the people on the ground in Afghanistan, so they don't go back to those dark ages and get brainwashed. So there are opportunities for us to create a lot of projects from that empowerment perspective of how to work with women, how to work with, and at the current circumstances, I want to be inclusive. So men and women, young boys and girls, all need help in Afghanistan. They have, especially those that have grown up in the past 20 years, they were very much exposed in the contemporary world, and they use social media. They were very much connected. So that's why we need to be able to continue that and not to give up that hope and that aspiration to still do what we were doing. There will be some challenges, obviously, for us to navigate now through the new system. Yet for us to know what is there for everybody, even the whole world is watching, you're watching, and as much as you guys know, that's how much we know as well, except that there are people that so desperate to get out of Afghanistan. But in terms of to continue our work, is that as His Excellency mentioned, we can do some charity work there. There are a lot of opportunities for us from universities to do mentorship for women, especially those that won't be able to return to work and they will be quite depressed and quite isolated, to just find ways how to the international communities can still give them that hope, that aspirations, that the future is there if they are informed and make their decisions and do what needs to be done. And that's how I got inspired, and that's how I got my aspirations from that, not to give up and start from wherever you get opportunities. So realistically, we need to do as much as we can to help them out of Afghanistan. But at the same time, we must not forget the 5 million people that are displaced in Afghanistan, the immediate help that needs to be sent, especially from the aid perspectives, that they need food, shelter, there are shortages of water even in Afghanistan right now. So streamlining those things with the trusted organizations that you have been working or wanted to work. Afghan Women on the Move is a charitable organization. We are a registered non-profit organization. We are currently doing this campaign of Chai Challenge, where we are collecting money. And the next 2 weeks, we are working with our outreach office there. So we are, organizing how to delivering first aid in Afghanistan. So that's the immediate help that you guys can do. Because the sponsorship and everything is all wonderful, but it's a medium kind of to long-term project or help. But that immediate help to give food and shelter for displaced people, that is something that it's very, very urgent and important.
Sure. There is another question coming for you, Maryam. Probably I can direct it to you only. it says that the Taliban seems intent only on destruction of farms, schools, infrastructure, and obviously the destruction of the rights of women as self-determining human beings. So what is it that they want exactly, other than their ultimate rule? What is their aim? It's a question by Kate D, and I can see that she's already live.
Hi, Kate. Good to see you. I have a lot of familiar faces here from you on social media, and lovely for you guys to take your time and join us. And I'm sure we have so many people on live watching us as well. I get a lot of inboxes here on my mobile, and I have Chris as well. Look, with the way Taliban has came, and His Excellency can speak on from that international relations and what happens behind, what was happening prior them. There were some noises, but it really took everybody by surprise. So nobody knows what they haven't in their mind, what they're going to do once their media is off their faces, what's going to happen with the complete withdrawal of troops of American, Australians, and everyone leaves. That is when the real Taliban will come. I hope, and at the moment, all we have for Afghanistan is our prayers, the hope, and the tears that we are working with, and that's all I can do, and the voices of gatherings like this that to advocate not to give up in Afghanistan. But nobody knows, to be honest. It's a very difficult questions to answer, but we will keep eye on them. We will keep pressuring them that we are not the women, men of 20 years ago. Not very, very far. 20 years ago, I was a different Maryam, and now I'm a complete different Maryam. So for me to go back to that Maryam, it's impossible.
Yeah.
So that should be something that, and there are so many Maryams here. I have my Afghan Women on the members here as well, that we all speak from the same kind of space, that we cannot go back to that 20 years old Maryam, Mushkan, Sajia, whoever. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair as a human being to start with, and then women, and then Afghan women.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much, Maryam. There is another question before I move to Maryam for the two questions that are on Zoom chat directed towards Maryam. I want to move to His Excellency for one question, which is on the Facebook Live from Smriti. And he says that, is the Australian government serving any role here? Are they allowing any refugees from Afghanistan at the moment? We know that they have already done 300 people. They have already transformed the 300 people have been displaced from Afghanistan to Australia. Are they doing anything else at the moment? Or also, probably you can give your views on how can the Australian government and the community come forward to help Afghanistan further in these times.
Australia, I think traditionally Australia has had a conservative immigration policy. Right now is an opportunity to liberalize, to help address this humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, a refugee, internally displaced persons crisis. I think the Australian government should approve all pending cases of those Afghans in Australia. B, transfer all those Afghans, held outside with pending cases. C, and at the same time, of course, expand its immigration program to take in more refugees based on the realities on the ground. And it can easily do so. It has the capabilities to identify, and there are people in the Afghan community. And Australia, New Zealand should also join this effort, by the way, if there are people from government or students or others from New Zealand, and send planes to evacuate on the one hand, but also launch a global program, much like Canada, where Afghans who cannot get out of the airport because there's such a crowd can actually go to places to Iran and Pakistan and Central Asia and other places just outside Afghanistan that they can easily apply and get interviewed at the high commissions or embassies and then get resettled. And I think that's how it should happen. And on the IDPs, like I said, there are UN agencies with appeals that have the capacity to deliver life-saving aid. They can provide assistance towards through them. but also look at other options. There are many options. Australia has been in Afghanistan, has a lot of experience and good expertise from the many Australians who have served in the civilian and military institutions of Australia, New Zealand, and Afghanistan. Then Afghans, like I said, in those two countries should be tapped into and their support secured to carry out this. But the more people are out and supported, and as they also arrive, they should be supported, because oftentimes you get refugees in these countries where they end up without any socioeconomic support. As a result, then they end up getting depressed. And it has happened in case of US, although Australia being different, you do have welfare programs as well as Europe and Canada, but in case of US, you're pretty much abundant on your own, and it's not easy to adapt, find a job, and then sustain a family in a very expensive and costly environment where you have to rent an apartment for $1,000 and then imagine the rest of the expenses, because at least in case of use, you have to pay for everything from mobile, from electricity, water, and of course, a massive country, no mass transit. So you have to have a car and then think about car expenses and so forth. So it has to be a full-fledged refugee aid program where they not only help and relocate and resettle, but also then help them settle and adapt and assimilate. Once they do that, I can guarantee, and we have seen from Maryam's experience and the rest of Afghanistan's very successful immigrant community, refugee community in Australia. No one is dependent, maybe for a while, but then they move on, working hard around the clock. They, immediately purchase a house, pay taxes, grow businesses, pay taxes, and contribute actively to local economies. So the investment is a very small down payment towards, the revenues and the financial contributions that these immigrants and refugees would make on the long run to Australians' very healthy economy.
Also, His Excellency, there is an interesting question going on in my mind coming from a country like India. Would love to know from you that what role do these neighboring countries play in the future of Afghanistan, and what happens to them after Taliban has taken over? Is there any impact of Taliban taking over on the neighboring countries and that particular region as a whole, including Pakistan, India, and other South Asian countries?
Well, I've written a lot on this issue, written over 300, mostly smaller op-eds to always, articulate the implications for regional stability and peace and international peace and security. Unfortunately, the neighborhood has failed us, and I would include all of them, and they're all now present in SCO, this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, very inclusive now with the addition of India and Pakistan, which could have and should have already felt this vacuum left behind by NATO. Remember that the member states of the SCO had long been complaining and criticizing NATO's presence in Afghanistan and even holding them accountable for instability and poverty and so forth. So for a long time, I've been saying, now it's your time. They're leaving. What have you been doing? Either bilaterally or multilaterally and collectively within SCO with the very agenda and mission and vision of helping ensure stability and peace in their very neighborhood, from China to Russia and India and certainly Pakistan to the rest. Because Afghanistan borders almost all of them. We have 6 neighbors: Central Asia, China, of course, India, very close, and Pakistan, because we also consider ourselves as Central Asian as much as South Asian. Simply we're the land bridge. And then if they think, and they often do so, that they can never really achieve their long-term economic objectives, especially through increased connectivity, without Afghanistan being peaceful and stable. So India, too, could on the long run remain engaged, but immediately focusing on addressing the humanitarian crisis, evacuating those in need of being evacuated. India is pretty close. It does have the airlift capability. It does have good ties with the US and NATO that could work with them to facilitate the evacuation of those who'd like to evacuate, and then remain engaged to keep whatever system that would come into play and check to ensure that the outcome of the talks as we speak are happening today would really result in a inclusive government that would include all Afghan voices, all Afghan ethnic groups to ensure sustainable peace and security. If this is going to be just one group and one voice, and neglecting and ignoring and sidelining and excluding others, that would be cause for continued instability, unfortunately, in this region. So from China to India and everyone else in the region, on the long run, they do have a stake in stability in Afghanistan and ending the imposed war in Afghanistan, and of course, any continuation of that peacefully, so that Afghans, as a very free-spirited, independent spirited, really are independent, that they would not be subjugated and coerced into ways that would, result in expanding resistance. We see resistance already happening, and that wouldn't dry up unless what I'm saying is going to materialize with the support of the regional stakeholders.
Sure. I think that adds a lot of value to the question that I asked to you, His Excellency. And I'm sure that if the countries in that region can come together on this particular issue, then we might see some sort of solution, or at least substantial amount of support from those countries, because it's in the goodwill of all those countries in the long term if they come together, because it might affect the stability and the peace of the entire South Asian and the Central Asian region. Moving to the next question on the Zoom chat, which is towards Afghan women on the move. It is from Namuna Bastola, which she says that I have heard from some of the young Afghan who are studying outside of their country for higher education that with the situation that has aroused in the country, the families are asking their children not to come back home and secure their place wherever they are. So in this case, what are the views of Afghan women on the move have in supporting those young people and their families?
We have to go with what we have from our with what the government has for the students at the moment. So from Afghan Women on the Move, we don't have any placements or resources to equip them and keep them back, and then even encouraging them to stay back. This is not our job to do. We are advocacy platform. We can advocate for them with our politicians, with our decision makers, with our friends and network, if they are not safe to go back home, if their parents believe that they will not be safe to go home. And they will be giving some priorities in terms of to look at their cases to see how Australia can help them. So that is what needs to be done, and that's what we will be doing. And if there are students that they are confused and their parents are very worried about their future and about what needs to be done, they can contact us, and then we will refer them to the right people or the right organization where they can look at their immigration status, how can they apply for permanent residency, or if they are struggling with their financially, if they are struggling, we have also connected with some organizations that they can help them if they can't get their parents to support them financially, because I do know some of the students are relying on their parents or their friends from overseas for their additional costs that they have to cover. And now the current circumstances that rapidly are changing in Afghanistan and around the world, some students are struggling. So more than happy to be in contact with them. But I'm sure there's a lot of help available from Australia to the students.
Also, Maryam, there's a question from Kate. She's asking that why do the Taliban hold the views they do regarding women, and where does it arise from?
I wish I had the answer. Sometimes I want to ask them that you guys were born from women, right? So you have a mother, you have a sister. How do you see your mother? How do you see your sisters? Where do you see them? Where they go when they get sick? Where they go when they feel not good? Do you want your wife to be going to whom, if not to a woman? If you need help or if you need a professional help, the women must be educated. The women must be visible. They should be known where they live, what they do, everything. And not everything happens from from home. There are some positions, there are some ways of life that needs for women to get out of your house, to be more visible to the world, to your community. Even with Taliban, so far, what we're hearing more about women empowerment, women rights, whatever they call it, we're hearing them from them. How difficult it is to hear from a man to decide for a future. And if they are very smart, they will be including women from the beginning, so they don't have another backlash, and we don't have time to waste another 20 years to fight again for our rights, and this will be their loss. And if they be unjust and unfair to their people, because at the moment, as much as the international communities has influence on Taliban and people that have dealt with them and make deals behind the scene, but they're also facing Afghan community. They have to get their approvals. Women, as I said, are not the same as we were 20 years ago. They will fight back. We will definitely fight back. So I wish I had the answer that why they are the way they are. I'm just so shocked to see.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's a huge question. I didn't expect you to have a nice, neat answer because, I mean, it is so bewildering. But it was just more that I just wanted to open up the discussion to it because I like you just said, I simply don't understand. They are ignoring, well, let's say, half of their population and all of the skills and knowledge and everything that women have to offer, and they're just completely ignoring it and repressing it. And it just seems bizarre, bewildering, and self-defeating to do so. It simply doesn't make any sense.
I know. I hope one of them is watching us right now so they can get some ideas.
Good. Me too.
Yeah. So I think that's another thing with social media, and this is something that I'm so hopeful with their presence on social media as well, that education can play a role to shift minds, to shift attitudes, to equip them with things that probably they never had 20 years ago. What if they accept women the way we are now? What if they accept the way that things has to be done for them to have a balanced approach to the needs of the community, the needs of the country? And that will be for their favor. But if they go back to that very traditional approach that nobody wants to look back, then they, as I said, they will definitely if not for the next couple of months or a year or so, but they definitely will lose the power, and that's for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And I was also watching a documentary a few days back on Afghanistan in 1970s. It looked quite different to what it was in 1990s, and now what it is being portrayed in the 21st century. I can't even believe that was the Kabul in 1970s, where the women can wear anything on the streets and they're not being restricted by anything. And now we are talking about these things, that we should be giving more rights to women in a country which was always giving rights to women back in 1960s and 1970s. Would you like to comment on that, Maryam, from maybe your family members you might have heard who lived in those times and also lived in the times during the 1990s, how the things evolved during those times?
From my experience and how my parents were from 1970s, and I have my parents' photos that I sometimes post on social media. I won't judge their freedom by the way they wear clothes. Yes, my mom used to wear those mini skirts and all of that, but that also doesn't project you as an independent woman or a free woman. Being free is you choose whether you wanted to cover or whether you wanted to wear mini skirts. That is the freedom we want. That freedom we want is to be able to choose for ourselves. And that was back home back in 1970s and until 1979. So women of women had a lot of freedom in Afghanistan to choose for themselves. And my grandparents were wearing scarf, but my mom was wearing miniskirt. So that is how it was. But all of a sudden, when this force came and these political agendas kind of played in Afghanistan, women and children become the victim of war, of these. And Afghanistan has been, the war in Afghanistan is not just that it's not a civil war, right? So there's a lot of players around Afghanistan, international interference, all of them made Afghanistan political state very complicated. And that's how it's becoming more difficult for us to pinpoint to what really happened in the past 4 years, why things are getting from bad to worse. But again, I'm hopeful that conversations, I'm hopeful that advocacies, the international pressures, young people of us not give up on Afghanistan just because there's Taliban. If Taliban changed from 20 years ago to this, I hope that I hope they don't take another 20 years to change to another Taliban, but we cannot afford to lose time to go back to start all over again and ask for our basic human rights.
Absolutely. One last question to you, Maryam, before I move to one last question to His Excellency, is that how do you think can the world now help Afghanistan? What can be some of the immediate steps? For example, we have got 15 people here on the Zoom. If each one of us can contribute a bit to that, they can further spread it through their networks, and that can create a ripple effect to the people we want to help in Afghanistan. So what do you think can each one of us in this Zoom meeting can do, which can further create a ripple effect and reach out to a large number of people?
Yeah, first to educate about the history of Afghanistan. Just maybe if just kind of not to scan reading about Afghanistan, but to equip yourself with where Afghanistan is located in the map, how it is, where is it, and where it came from, and all of that can help you to give a bit of picture about Afghanistan. And the immediate help that you can do is to raise awareness on the needs of immediate help that can be done for the civilian, for displaced people in Afghanistan, which needs your help, aid. How can we do some fundraising? How can we streamlining some help that straight goes on the ground to the people? And that is the immediate help that we can do, because at the moment Afghanistan, this is I know what's happening there. As I said, there is even shortage of water, let alone the food and everything else. Women and children are suffering from malnutrition, and Afghanistan has lost so much. And war does take away lots from you, not your home, or your materialistic stuff. There's so much it can take from you, which takes long to heal. Here I'm standing in front of you guys, or I'm talking in front of you guys after 20 years. Still, I feel that there is so much that I've lost, that no amount of money or this fancy life that we have here that we taking for granted can replace those lost moments that it was by force taken away from me. So I didn't migrate to Australia to choose that, I'm going to Australia by my friends. It wasn't like that. It's like everything gets burned from you and you just push to another country, and then you will be lucky enough to go to a better country. And I'm lucky that I'm here in Australia. So for you guys to help Afghan, if each one of you help one family for the next 6 months until things get settled and we know what really happened, that will be a great help for Afghanistan.
Sure. I think it's just the way we can just imagine what might have happened to you, Maryam, at that point of time, and a lot of other women who went through the same situation under the threat of Taliban. We can just imagine through the words that you are speaking, but the people who have actually gone through the same situation can actually express the fact how much pain and suffering they might have gone through at that point of time.
Yeah.
One last question to His Excellency, if he's still there.
I'm sure he's there.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
the question is related to the fact that a lot of questions have been asked to Joe Biden and the US presidency at this point of time, that they have not done what they were required to do. They didn't have a proper peace deal, and it was quite a rushed plan to get out of Afghanistan. What do you think really went wrong in that? And how do you see US playing a role in the near future to get Afghanistan from where it is now?
Well, unfortunately, like I said, everything has gone wrong from the very beginning simply because of a lack of commitment. And remember, Afghanistan's mission was only about American politics and the every 4-year administration politics, and what the priorities of the every 4-year administration have been so far, from President Bush to President Biden. Unfortunately, it has never been about the Afghan people, the Afghan women, about this country needing, the institutionalization of all the freedoms that we've achieved, democracy, of course, and so forth. Had it been, win-win, 50-50, I don't think if they would have withdrawn. I think they've withdrawn now at their own cost, and they've been through this. They did withdraw from Afghanistan. Remember, back in the early 1990s, Afghanistan was more or less in the same situation when the communist regime was overthrown, and Afghanistan needed post-conflict reconstruction and a new state that should have been inclusive. But unfortunately, the Clinton administration back then justified it in the same ways which the Biden administration. He said, it's the economy is stupid. Why should we be in Afghanistan? We achieved our goal. We defeated the Soviets by Afghans. Now we don't need to stay. And they moved on. And as they moved on, soon terrorists back knocked on their doors. And first Tanzania and Kenya, where they bombed their embassies, and then they hit one of their ships in the Arabian Sea, and then of course followed by 9/11. It's only 9/11 that moved the U.S. to re-engage in Afghanistan, and but unfortunately they didn't get the job done on a sustainable basis, where the terrorists and extremists would not unfortunately recapture in Afghanistan. This time around, much more distracted, much more radicalized, much more lethal, and much more intent, with a victory morale that is skyrocketed, and they think that they've defeated NATO and that there's nothing that they can stop them from moving on to another country. And soon that would, they've already been talking about Kashmir. They've of course been making hints about China and Central Asia, beginning with Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And there you only need to see where the Taliban have sheltered Al-Qaeda, East Turkestan Islamic movement of China, and as well as Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, which mostly targets Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And they're all based in northeast of Afghanistan, where they actually helped the Taliban capture much of north of east of Afghanistan, because their fighters are educated, they're well trained, and so forth. And that's been kicked into Afghanistan by what the Pakistani military called a Zarb-e-Az military campaign that they, I think, conducted a few years ago. That had been in Pakistan, but they were kicked into Afghanistan, and Taliban since have been sheltering them, and alongside the Taliban, they've been fighting to make the gains that they've recently made. So that's where things stand. And as far as the implications for the region and the world, the United States sooner or later would have to come back, maybe if not this administration, because it's so intent on getting out and really not valuing the achievements, not caring about democracy anymore, unfortunately losing credibility with the world, with all democracies that have spent blood and treasure in Afghanistan, and other places where they have often talked about a lack of democracy, authoritarian regimes and dictatorships and so forth. So I've lost faith. I don't think if they could speak with the same credibility now that they have completely, let down and betrayed democracy in a country where democracy had been taking off in big ways, even just like, a week before the fall of Kabul. And we now see all the forces of democracy, human rights and women's rights. So these are universal values. None of these were imposed on Afghanistan because, and the Afghan people as a mountainous nation were naturally egalitarian, we're naturally centrifugal, we naturally seek, autonomy and democracy. And democracy is the best form of, government in a context like Afghanistan. And so, unfortunately, they've lost it. If you also look at the Afghan constitution, it is based on Islam, Afghan cultures and traditions, and as well as our obligations under international laws. This is, a case where we could have won, we could have been victorious versus non-state actors propelled by a pariah rogue state, unfortunately. So it is a tragedy at multiple levels, but foremost for the Afghan people, foremost for the innocent civilians, and especially women, youth, and children of Afghanistan. Just, not thinking about politics and geopolitics and what, different countries did. From our neighborhood, which I discussed, to, bigger powers. They have done this at their own cost, and it, wouldn't be too long before they would realize that.
Thank you so much, His Excellency. I think these are quite tough questions to answer at the moment and might get answered as in how the situation unfolds in Afghanistan in the next couple of days. Before we end the session, is there any final message from you, Maryam?
For us, I'm getting a little bit emotional right now. For us here on the group, to keep talking, to keep hoping for the better Afghanistan. And for Afghanistan, the friends that are watching us right now online, we are with you. I have personally experienced everything that they are experiencing right now, worse even. Not comparing, but I know how hopeless you feel at these kind of circumstances. But at least, and now social media, virtual conversation, virtual connection can connect us. I'm hopeful that Afghanistan will not give up, and we're not going to go back to where we were 20 years ago. We'll be fighting. So our prayers are for the whole world, and we pray for the harmony of the entire world.
Yep. I'm sure that this session might have played a huge role in reaching out to the larger community and taking that message to the community, bringing everyone together on this important issue. But with this, we essentially come to an end to our 14th PGC Weekly Podcast that we organize every week at UNSW Sydney. We would like to thank Ambassador of Afghanistan to Sri Lanka, His Excellency Mohammad Ashraf Haidari, and also the founder of Afghan Women on the Move, Maryam Popal Zahid, for taking their valuable time today to join us for this podcast. I really hope that this podcast has made sense in reaching out to the larger communities on this important issue of what is going on in Afghanistan. And if each one of us can come together to support Afghanistan in these tough times, I think we can definitely get Afghanistan out of where it is. And I don't think that in the 21st century, you might see such kind of ideology sustaining for a long period of time, where you try to suppress women's rights and where you try to take away the basic rights of what a human being might want while he's living on this planet. Anyways, I think that was a great discussion. Thank you so much, everyone who joined us today. And have a good night from Sydney. And have a great day ahead from wherever you are joining in Afghanistan or Sri Lanka.